And I have Yud Gimel.
Yeah.
A woman whose husband and son went overseas, and they came and told her, "Your husband died, and then your son," and she married, and afterwards they told her that the reverse had occurred. She must leave her husband, and any child born before or after is a mamzer. If they told her your son died and then your husband, and she underwent yibum, and afterward they told her that the reverse had occurred, she must leave her husband, and any child born before her or after is a mamzer. If they told her your husband died and she married, and afterward they told her he was alive but now he is dead, she must leave her husband, and any child before is a mamzer, and any child born after is not a mamzer. If they told her her husband died and she was then betrothed, and then her husband reappeared, she may return to him. Even if the last one gave her a bill of divorce, he does not disqualify her from the priesthood. Rabbi Elazar ben Masai expounded the following: a woman divorced from her husband, but not a woman divorced from a man who is not her husband. A man whose wife went overseas and they came and told him, "Your wife died," and he married her sister, and afterward his wife reappeared and she may return to him. He is permitted to marry the relative of the second woman. The second woman is permitted to marry his relatives, and if the first woman died, he is permitted to marry the second. If they told him your wife died and he married her sister, and afterwards they told him she was alive, but then now, then, but then she is now dead. The child born is a mamzer, or not the child born after. It Yossi says anyone who disqualifies for other disqualifies for himself, and anyone who does not disqualify for others does not disqualify for himself. If they told him your wife died and he married her paternal sister, and they told him she died and he married her maternal sister, and then they told him she died and he married her paternal sister, and then they told him she died and he married her maternal sister, and then it was discovered that they were all alive, he is permitted to the first, third, and fifth. And they released their co-wives, but it prohibited to the second and fourth, and cohabitation with either of them does not release her co-wife. However, if he cohabitated with the second after the first one's death, he is permitted to the second, the fourth, and they release their co-wives, but is prohibited to the third and fifth. Cohabitation with either of them does not release her co-wife. Okay, good.
Okay. Ben Teisha Shanim. Okay, so now we start dealing with the laws. The rest of this parak is about what happens when you've got a Yavam who is between the ages of 9 and 13. From 13 upwards, from Bar Mitzvah, let's just say, because actually 13 is just an estimation. But from when he becomes Bar Mitzvah and upwards, then he's an adult, and he's like any other brother, even though an older brother. So, but between 9 and 13, he has the status where his cohabitation is considered to have legal effect, but because he still doesn't have das, it's not a proper marriage yet. So, um, so he has an interesting sort of status as far as Yibum is concerned. He would not be able to contract a marriage by himself because he
Mhm.
doesn't have the das, but in terms of Yibum, he can have an effect. Okay, and the only way that he can have an effect is by bia. He can't do it with anything else that he does has no legal effect because he's a minor.
All right, all right.
Okay. So what can he do? Ben Teisha Shanim V'Yom Echad. Once he's 9 years old, who posel al yidei achim, he can have the effect of disqualifying a Yevama from his brothers. V'achim poslim al yado, and his brothers can disqualify him from him. Ela shehu posel techila, he can only have an effect when he starts the act. So if he starts by doing bia with one of the Yevamos, he has the effect of posting for all the other brothers. But his brothers can mess him up whether they start at the beginning or at the end. Okay, how does this work? Mishna is going to spell it out. Ketzad. Okay, so he's 9 years old and he had relations with his Yavama. Okay. Pasal al yidei achin. So now what he's done is he's prohibited the Yavamas, both her and any co-wives, from having from doing yibum with any of his older adult brothers. Ba'u aleha achin. However, if nonetheless one of his brothers then went and had relations with the Yavama, even the one that whether it's a co-wife um, or the one that the 9 year old had relations with, the asuba mamar, or even if they just did a mamar, or even if they just nasnu get, or even or chaltzu, even if they just did chalitza, paslu al yado, then they have messed him up. and he cannot remain married to the woman that he had relations with. Okay. Ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad Shebal Yevimto. So again, he has the 9-year-old who went and had relations with a Yevama. V'achar kach ba aleha achiv shehu ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad. And now he's got another brother who's also in that age gap, who also comes and has relations with the same Yevama. Now, what's happened over here? If it had been an adult brother who'd come afterwards, he would have messed him up. But now we've got two brothers who are in this band over here. And here we see an interesting machlokes. The Tanna Kama says pasal al yadois, that the second brother messes up the first brother. That he does have the power to mess up the first brother, because according to this view, the status of the 9-year-old who has relations with the Yavama is it's a partial marriage, and doesn't get completed until he grows up and becomes bar mitzvah and continues living with her, and then she becomes his wife fully. But all that time he's vulnerable. It's not a full marriage; it's a partial marriage, and the action even of his 9-year-old brother can mess him up.
Because he doesn't have the das.
Huh?
He doesn't have the he doesn't have
No,
the
he doesn't
das.
have the dot, but he has maseh. He has maseh. Okay. Okay, but Rabbi Shimon Omer lo pasal. See, now Rabbi Shimon has a different shita in what's the status of this 9-year-old is. He's saying the first one is saying that it's a partial marriage. Rabbi Shimon is saying no, there's no such thing as a partial marriage. What we have with the 9-year-old is a safek. It's a safek whether he's married or not, but one way or another, he's either completely married or he's not married at all. Okay, now that changes things a lot. It's consistent with the previous situation, because if he started the marriage, then certainly it's a suffix, he might already be married to her, and therefore the other brothers cannot join on to her. And if they do one of these actions, it's going to mess him up. He cannot remain married to her because maybe it wasn't a marriage in the first place, and he's got to get out of there. Okay. But now, in our case over here, we've got two brothers in the band of 9 to 13, and the second one, if the first one was able to perform a yibum, then that's his wife. And if another 9-year-old brother comes and has relations with her, it's just a znus, okay, and nothing happened. On the other hand, if it wasn't an effective marriage, then the second guy wasn't effective either. So Mima Nafshach, according to Rabbi Shimon, he can stay married to her.
If the second one had relations with him, that's a legal.
Of course, it's a znus. And you could say, okay, so if it was with her consent, and maybe he might have to divorce her anyway because it was an adultery over here.
Right.
But nonetheless, he didn't puzzle her. Let's say it was without her consent. Okay, so that's the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, and whether you say it's a partial marriage or if it's just a safek.
Right.
Okay. Mishna Ches, ben Teisha Shanim v'yom echad shebal yevimto. Again, same case. 9-year-old has relations with a Yavama. V'achar kach ba al tzarasa. And now he himself goes and has relations with the tzara. Okay, pasal al yedei atzmo. So just as if his brother had come and had relations with the woman that he'd married, he now himself has made himself pasal because he had relations with the tzara. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Omer lo pasal, and exactly the same achlokes over there. It's a mima nafshach. Either it is a marriage or it's not a marriage. Either way, it'll work out. It'll work out okay that he hasn't puzzled his own wife. Ben Teisha Shanim v'yom echad sheba al yevimto. Once again, there's the case of the 9-year-old who has relations with his Yevama, and then he dies. Now he's got another brother who's surviving. Choletzes v'lo misyabemes. He must do chalitza. She must do chalitza. She cannot be taken in yibum, because now we have this safek case. If it had been a proper marriage, then it would have been consummated and she would have fallen. But remember, we had the case where the brother died, and the second brother came and did mamar, and then the second brother died. and then we said that's a chalitza, not a yibum, because there's a derabanan marriage over there. You cannot do a yibum with a woman who's fallen from two different houses. The same woman who's fallen from two different houses. Okay, so the same thing happens over here. She must do chalitza, not yibum, because it's not a proper marriage to the younger brother.
Okay.
Nasa isha v'meis, if he married wait, Nasa Isha V'Meis. If the in Ben Tesha Shanim V'Yom Echad Nasa Isha, if he married a woman and died without children, Harei Zo Patura. She doesn't need chalitza at all in a Yom because there's no kiddushin. So
Uh,
so what we're saying is that Nasa Isha is that actually it's not an Nisuin. He's just playing pretend because it's only because of the if there's a Yibum situation that he's got any potential of doing anything, because normally we don't allow a person to make a Kinyan beer. So if a 9-year-old married a woman and then subsequently died, Areza Patora, she doesn't have any obligation of chalitza or yibum because it wasn't a marriage.
Right.
Let's just see if there's anything else. Well, he's a cook. No. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, let's go back
This,
to
this,
Vav.
this reminds me of a news article I just saw yesterday. I just glanced through the news article. This woman was a teacher in the Midwest, and she won like Teacher of the Year. She was like the greatest teacher, all this kind of stuff, and she was arrested for having relations with some of her students.
Well, I'm sure that's why they thought she was the greatest teacher of the year.
I'm sure that the students voted for her, right? I couldn't believe it when I read that. All the things that go on in this world. All right. A man may not, vav, vav. A man may not refrain from the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying unless he has children. Beit Shammai says two males, but Beis Hillel says a male and a female, as it is stated, he created them male and female. One who married a woman and remained with her 10 years, but she did not bear children, is not permitted to refrain from the fulfilling of a mitzvah. If he divorced her, she may marry another. If the second one may remain with her for 10 years, if she miscarried, he counts from the time of her miscarriage. A man is commanded to be fruitful and multiply, but not the woman. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says concerning both of them, it is stated, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. If a widow was married to a Kohen Gadol, or a divorcee or Kalutza who was married to an ordinary Kohen, brought milag slaves or fixed valued slaves into the marriage for him, the milag slaves may not eat truma, but the fixed valued slaves may eat truma. These are the milag slaves. If they died, the loss is hers, and if they appreciated, profit is hers. Even though he's obligated to feed them, he may not eat truma. And these are the fixed value slaves. If they died, the loss is his, and if they appreciated, the profit is his. Since he's liable for the loss, they may eat truma. The daughter of Israel married a Kohen and brought into the marriage slaves for him. Whether they are Malak slaves or fixed value slaves, they may eat truma. However, if the daughter of a Kohen married a Israel and brought into the marriage either Malak slaves or fixed value slaves, they may not eat truma. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And Moed Katan. Okay. Olive Dove. We not you burial niches nor build tombs during Kolamoid, but we may adapt burial niches during Kolamoid, dig wash ponds during Kolamoid, and construct a coffin in the courtyard with the deceased. Rabbi Yehuda permits the latter unless the boards are at hand. We may not take wives during Kolamoid, neither the virgins nor widows nor may levirate marriage be entered into, because it is a source of joy for the one who does. However, one may remarry his divorcee. A woman may make adornments for during Kol Moed, and Rabbi Yehuda says she may not apply lime because it is a disfigurement to her. An unskilled person may sew in his usual manner, but an artisan may sew only with irregular stitches. They may interlace supports for beds. Rabbi Yossi says maybe even tighten them. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. Yeah, shkalim.
Okay. Cast base. All the utensils that are found in Yerushalayim are on the path down leading to the mikvah are assumed to be tamei, but those found on the path leading up from the mikvah are assumed to be tahor. But the path for their descent is not the path of their ascent. These are the words of Rav Meir. Yossi says all are assumed to be tahor except for the basket, the shovel, the spade that are reserved for grave sites. A knife which was found on the 14th of Nisan may be used immediately for slaughter, but if it was found on the 13th of Nisan, he must immerse it again. And a meat cleaver, whether found on the 13th or 14th, must be immersed again, unless the 14th fell on Sabbath, in which case he may slaughter with it immediately. But if it was found on the 15th of Nisan, he may slaughter with it immediately. If it was found tied to a knife, then it is considered as a knife. If a curtain has been contaminated through contact with the secondary tumor, they immerse it with a temple complex and they bring it in immediately. But if it was contaminated through contact with the primary tumor, they immerse it outside the temple complex. If they spread it out to dry in the kale, then they spread it out in the kale. If it was a new curtain, they would spread it out upon the roof of the portico so the people may see their handicraft where it was beautiful. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. We are on to here. Yes. Come on, come on. Okay. Shavias. Zion hay. Young sprouts of the service tree and the carob tree, the seventh year applies to them and their proceeds. Beer applies to them and to their proceeds. The lovum of the terebinth of the pistachio tree and the white thorn, the seventh year applies to them and to their proceeds. Beer does not apply to them or to their proceeds, but beer applies to the leaves since they fall off from their stem. The rose, cypress, ketaf, and lotus, the seventh year applies to them and their proceeds. And Reb Shimon says the seventh year does not apply to ketaf since it is not a fruit. If a new rose has been preserved in an old oil, the old rose may be taken. If an old and new, it is subject to beer. The new carrots have been preserved in old wine or in old and new, and they are subject to beer. This is the general principle. If it imparts flavor and there are two kinds, it is subject to beer. And when it is of the same kind, whatever the quantity, the seventh year renders forbidden, whatever the quantity, if of the same kind, but of different kinds, it imparts flavor. Okay, Caleb.
Yeah.
Okay, we have Kaf Zion base. Clothes can contract tumas, midrash tuma if it measures 3 handbreadths by 3 handbreadths, and it can contract quartz tuma if it measures 3 handbreadths by 3 finger breadths. So 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. Sack can contract tuma if it measures 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths. Hide can contract tuma if it measures 5 handbreadths by 5 handbreadths. A mat can contract tuma if it measures 6 handbreadths by 6 handbreadths. This measure applies equally to midrash tuma and to corpse tuma. Ramea says regarding sack, its remnants can contract tuma if they are measured 4 handbreadths by initially, it contracts tuma when that is completed. If one made a piece of material with 2 handbreadths of cloth and 1 handbreadth of sack, 3 handbreadths of sack and 1 handbreadth of hide, or 4 handbreadths of hide and 1 handbreadth of matting, it is tahor. But if he made a piece of material with 5 handbreadths of matting and 1 handbreadth of hide, 4 handbreadths of hide and 1 handbreadth of sack, or 3 handbreadths of sack and 1 handbreadth of cloth, it's tameh. This is the rule. Whatever has a different material attached to it, it is from a material more stringent than it is tameh. If it is from a material less stringent, it is tahor. If one trims any of these materials into a piece measuring 1 handbreadth by 1 handbreadth, it's tameh. If one trims from the bottom of a basket a piece measuring 1 handbreadth by 1 handbreadth, it is tameh. If he trimmed a piece from the size of the basket, then she removes the tahor. But the comments say if it trims a piece of the basket measuring 1 handbreadth by 1 handbreadth in any place, it is tameh. Okay.
And Shavuos.
Okay, Shavuos, we have Dalek Tess. I adore you that you come and testify for me, and that so-and-so promised to give me 200 zoos, but did not give me. They are exempt, but one is not liable except for a claim of money, as in the case of a deposit. I adore you that when you know testimony from me, that you will come and testify for me, they are exempt because the oath preceded the testimony. If he stood in the synagogue and said, I adore you that if you know testimony from me, that you come and testify to me, they are exempt unless he directs himself to them.
Okay, and we're done.
Okay,
Okay,
have
a lovely
enjoy.
day, a beautiful wet day.
Thank you. Thank you.